Welcome back, Global Health students, to our second element of our presentation. Thus far, we've highlighted the importance of economic globalization, and now we'll look at demographic issues. Now, how many of you have taken a course called Human Geography, perhaps in high school? If you've had such a class, then you know the basic fundamentals of demography. There are 5 demographic issues that impact public health. Extremely divergent growth rates, aging, youth bulges, gender differentials, and urbanization and migration. And before we get in further to demography, I wanted to share with you a TED Talk from one of my favorite statisticians, Dr. Hans Rosling. Looking at the world through a public health lens can provide particular insights as to how the world has changed. This TED presentation is from the famous Hans Rosling, who is an MD, PhD from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. You should definitely take an opportunity to go to TED and review some of his fascinating and just funny TED Talks. He's got a whole bunch of them. This is one of my favorites here. Basic to the understanding of this video, I want to explain this concept called the total fertility rate, or TFR. The total fertility rate is the average number of children that were born to a woman over her lifetime. The fertility replacement level is 2.1 children per woman. So each woman would tend to have plus or minus about 2 kids over her lifetime. The fertility rate of the total United States population is just below the replacement level of about 1.9 children per woman. However, the fertility of the population of the U.S. is below replacement among those native born and above replacement among immigrant families, most of whom come to the United States from countries with higher fertility rates than that in the United States. So let's take a look at this very fascinating Hans Rosling TED video entitled Stats That Reshape Your Worldview.
About 10 years ago, I took on the task to teach global development to Swedish undergraduate students. That was after having spent about 20 years together with African institutions studying hunger in Africa. So I was sort of expected to know a little about the world. And I started in our medical university, Karolinska Institute, an undergraduate course called Global Health. But when you get that opportunity, you get a little nervous. I thought these students coming to us actually have the highest grade you can get in Swedish college system. So I thought maybe they know everything I'm going to teach them about. So I did a pre-test when they came. And one of the questions from which I learned a lot was this one: which country has the highest child mortality of these 5 pairs? And I put them together so that in each pair of country, one has twice the child mortality of the other. And this means that it's much bigger the difference than the uncertainty of the data. I won't put you at a test here, but it's Turkey, which is highest there, Poland, Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these were the results of the Swedish students. I did it so I got a confidence interval, which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. That means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right half of the cases. But the students are not there. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Huh? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We stop the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here. They still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there. But now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
And now we're going to look at another of Hans Rosling's stats, focusing on child survival. So let's just jump on in.
Back to about here at 1960. And I would like to compare South Korea, which is this one, with Brazil, which is this one. The label went away for me here. And I would like to compare Uganda, which is there. And I can run it forward like this. And you can see how South Korea is making a very, very fast advancement, whereas Brazil is much slower. And if we move back again here, and we put on trails on them like this, you can see again that the speed of development is very, very different. And the countries are moving more or less in the same rate as money and health. But it seems you can move much faster if you are healthy first than if you are wealthy first. And to show that, you can put on the way of United Arab Emirates. They came from here, a mineral country. They catch all the oil, they got all the money, but health cannot be bought at the supermarket. You have to invest in health. You have to get kids into schooling. You have to train health staff. You have to educate the population. And Sheikh Zayed did that in a fairly good way. And in spite of falling oil prices, he brought this country up here. So we got a much more mainstream appearance of the world, where all countries tend to use their money better than they used in the past. Now, this is more or less if you look at average data of the countries. They are like this. Now, that's dangerous to use average data because there's such a lot of difference within countries. So if I go and look here, we can see that Uganda, that today is where South Korea was 1960. If I split Uganda, there's quite a difference within Uganda. These are the quintiles of Uganda. The richest 20% of Ugandans are there, the poorest are down there. If I split South Africa, it's like this. And if I go down and look at Niger, where there was such a terrible famine lastly, it's like this. The 20% poorest of Niger is out here, and the 20% richest of South Africa is there, and yet we tend to discuss on what solutions there should be in Africa. Everything in this world exists in Africa. And you can't discuss universal access to HIV for that quintile up here with the same strategy as down here. The improvement of the world must be highly contextualized. And it's not relevant to have it on regional level. We must be much more detailed. We find that students get very excited when they can use this. And even more policymakers and the corporate sectors would like to see how the world is changing. Now, why doesn't this take place? Why are we not using the data we have? We have data in the United Nations, in the national statistical agencies, and in universities and other non-governmental organizations, because the data is hidden down in the databases. And the public is there, and the internet is there, but we have still not used it effectively. All that information we saw changing in the world does not include publicly funded statistics. There are some web pages like this.
In this Hans Rosling presentation, the bubbles on the bottom, the dark bubbles, need the most attention. That's where our focus should be in global public health. In addition, it's important to remember Hans's second point, health before wealth. Health before wealth. Every country that has made even the most moderate improvement in their healthcare system has benefited from improved economic production. A healthier population is more productive. Now this chart here, total fertility rates for selected country, provides you with more details on Hans Rosling's presentation. Compare Iran's total fertility rates. So take a moment if you want and look at the countries and their total fertility rates. You can stop the presentation and find Iran. Iran's total fertility rate is 1.86. Compare that with Burundi's. Do you see Burundi's, which is 3.99. That's huge. 1.86 for Iran versus Burundi, which is under high, Burundi is 5.99. I'm so sorry. So Iran to Burundi, a huge, significant difference between those two countries and their fertility rates. Now we see three population pyramids for countries that are part of the bottom billion. Remember we alluded to the bottom billion in our first economic globalization presentation? These population pyramids have a large, young base and a long, skinny middle. See, if you look at Mali on the left, a large, wide base, and then a skinny middle. So they've got lots of young people and not a lot of older people. And these are from populationpyramid.net. You can take a look at these and make them on your own as well. Now these population pyramids represent countries whose population growth rates are substantially slowing. You can see their narrow bases. See, look at Mexico, how much more narrow that is than the previous slides. And then we have three different population pyramids. Compare these with the previous two slides. These three pyramids are all top-heavy, so there are more people older than the younger people. So there are more older people than younger people. That's Japan, Germany, and Russia. Despite the decline in total fertility rates, the world population is still on the rise. It is beginning to level off, and in a few decades, it will start to decline slowly. We are experiencing an aging trend in the United States. Take a look at the website, populationpyramid.net, for more information on this. In 2030, in the United States, there'll be more women over the age of 85 than girls under the age of 5. Many issues are associated with aging: dementia, arthritis, broken bones, and of course, limited mobility. Very few medical schools actually offer courses in gerontology. I know I read a few of your bios, and a couple of you are interested in working with older adults, which is fabulous. This population is going to grow, and they're going to need help. We need to focus more resources on managing the needs of our growing elderly population. Now let's discuss youth bulges, another key demographic. What is a youth bulge? Well, the actual definition of a youth bulge is it occurs if the ratio of the population aged 15 to 29 aged 15 through 29 compared to the population aged 30 through 54 exceeds 1.27. That's the formal definition of a youth bulge. I'll read it again. A youth bulge will occur if the ratio of the population aged 15 to 29 compared to the population 30 through 54 exceeds 1.27. And here on this slide, we highlight some countries with youth bulges. So let's take an example of a youth bulge. Let's look at Iran. Iran experienced a youth bulge in 2013. This is now dissipating. But you can see our youth bulge right there. We're looking at those two cohorts, and you can see the difference, that it's significant. Also, Mali and Yemen are currently experiencing youth bulges. Remember, if the ratio of the population aged 15 to 29 compared to the population 30 through 54 exceeds 1.27, then, yep, that's a youth bulge. Yemen is the worst. They've got such a youth bulge. Countries with these problems require special attention to keep their youth engaged in positive activities to keep them from trouble. They contribute to prolonging conflicts and increasing the level of violence involved. So if your population, if your young people if there are no jobs, if there's no hope, if there's despair, then there's going to be anger, rioting on the streets, and there's going to be trouble. And that's many times what youth bulges yield. Now let's look at gender differentials. They only occur in countries under special circumstances. And where can they be found? Any guesses? Any guesses? Well, they're found in India and in China. Why? This type of male-female differential can only arise from selective abortion or female infanticide. Many public health consequences arise from this disparity, including female prostitution, incidents in STDs, and human trafficking, which takes on an international scale. They basically have to abduct girls from other countries. When there are too many males for the number of women, the number of females, there are gender differentials. Here we see two countries with significant gender differentials, India on the top and China on the bottom. India has 12.5% more males than females under the age of 25. China has 13.1% more males than females under the age of 25. You can see the males are the blue bars on the left and the females are the red bars on the right. A New York Times article recently reported that women in some small cities in China can now marry 2 men. Isn't that exciting? Because there just aren't enough women. So guess what? You can marry 2 men. This shortage of females has already resulted in cross-border human trafficking. Vietnamese women are being trafficked into China. It also results in more prostitution and sexually transmitted diseases. It may also lead to more violence in a society, but probably only if it's accompanied by a youth bulge. Now let's discuss migration and urbanization. Projections forecast that there will be a greater movement of people in this century, the 21st century, than all of the movements in the history of humanity. This is country to country and within countries. People are migrating for urbanization for 2 key primary reasons. Number 1, to seek better economic opportunities. And number 2, as we all know, refugees. Oh, poor refugees are fleeing violence, persecution, and natural disasters. Migrants often face extreme hostility from the people within the city that they are migrating to, usually because, and this is in quotes, they're taking our jobs, they're taking our jobs. That's the fear. So there's a lot of hostility against migrants who are moving into areas because of the fear of jobs. Populations migrate to urban areas for many reasons. Let's first explore those who migrate in search of better economic opportunities. They're taking our jobs, they're taking our jobs. An example of this is Ethiopians went to South Africa in search of economic opportunity, but they were resented from the South Africans because they felt they were stealing their jobs. This is an article highlighting that. 4 dead after anti-immigrant violence flares in Durban, South Africa. Other people flee because of persecution, and these are refugees. A legitimate refugee, one who is covered by the UNHCR mandate, and we'll talk more about this in another module, flees their country of origin because of persecution based on religion, ethnicity, political beliefs, or membership in a certain class or group. The Rohingya refugees who are leaving Myanmar, fleeing persecution, are trying to get to Australia, and actually not to the closest country, which is their central problem, which would be Bangladesh, Thailand, or Malaysia. They're trying to get to Australia, these Rohingya refugees. Take a look in the papers or in media, and you'll see many articles about this sad population, the Rohingya refugees, and how they're being faced with genocide. They're being killed left and right. Forced migration may also occur from people fleeing conflict. This boat in this picture is full of people leaving North Africa trying to reach Italy. Some are true refugees fleeing persecution, and some are migrants seeking economic opportunity. Global refugees and displaced persons have increased tremendously over time. The need for public health care for refugees and displaced persons, and a displaced person is one who, it's like a refugee, but they stay within their own country borders. They just have to move from their home, are critical. The primary concerns for this population are security, number 1, and then public health, number 2, water and sanitation. And only then, of course, food and shelter. In many countries of the world, natural disasters, including hurricanes and earthquakes and floods that displace large numbers of people, leave populations highly vulnerable to diarrheal disease emergencies that oftentimes are more deadly than the original natural disaster. Public health is absolutely critical. This is a huge issue for this century. I just listened to Zakir Faharia on Sunday, and all the scientists are predicting that natural disasters are going to be the primary issue for 2018. Climate change refugees are forecasted to be 250 million by 2050. 20 to 30 million of those will be from or within Bangladesh. What is a climate change refugee? Those who are forced to flee their area because of issues relating to climate change. And this process has already begun with the IOM, the International Organization of Migration. Approximately 70% of Dhaka slum dwellers, which is approximately 5 million people in Bangladesh, are climate refugees. These are them on the slide. Dhaka is the fastest growing megacity. It had 12 million people in 2005. It grew to 17 million in 2012. That's a huge difference. Huge growth. Urbanization is also a primary public health concern. It accounts for all population growth this century. You can see urbanization is increasing, and people are certainly not moving to the rural areas. Urban and rural populations have different health needs. Each group requires targeted health programs and customized message. And we need to think about this when we create public health programs for our various populations. As we conclude, there are a dozen or 2 countries with very high total fertility rates and a handful of countries that are declining in population, and everyone else in between. Those with rapid, number 1, those with rapid growth rates and declining growth rates that are of public health and public health safety concern. Number 2, people who are aging require a whole range of public health services to keep them out of institutions, and this is a rapidly growing issue. Our third summary point is a critical issue that is causing great violence is the youth bulge. The fourth point, Gender differentials are substantial contributors to prostitution, human trafficking, and STDs. And our fifth and final point pertain to urbanization and migration. Refugees, displaced persons, and migrants from rural to urban areas all require special attention with respect to public health. Let's take a break now.